The moment I realized my neighbor might be secretly watching me happened on an ordinary Tuesday night. I had just finished dinner and walked into my living room. As I reached for the light switch, I noticed something strange outside my window. The curtain in the house across the street moved slightly. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe someone inside had just walked past the window. But the next night, the same thing happened again. And the night after that. Eventually, I started noticing something that made my stomach tighten every time I looked outside. That curtain only moved when I entered the room. My name is Daniel. About 2 years ago, I moved into a quiet neighborhood that seemed perfect for someone who wanted a calm environment. Tree-lined streets, friendly neighbors, children playing outside in the evenings. It was the kind of place where people waved when they walked past your house. The home across from mine belonged to a man named Mark. Mark had lived there for several years before I moved in. He was quiet, polite, and mostly kept to himself. Occasionally, we exchanged small greetings while collecting mail or mowing our lawns. Nothing unusual. Nothing uncomfortable. At least, not in the beginning. For the first several months after moving in, life felt completely normal. My routine was predictable. Work during the day. Dinner at home in the evening. Sometimes watching television or reading before going to sleep. The neighborhood felt safe. Peaceful. The kind of place where you never expect anything strange to happen. But sometime, the smallest details begin to change the way you see everything around you. The first time I noticed the curtain movement clearly was late one evening. I had turned on the living room light while carrying a cup of coffee. As I sat down on the couch, I glanced toward the window. Across the street, the curtain in Mark's front window shifted slightly. The movement was subtle, almost unnoticeable. At the time I assumed it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was walking past the window. Maybe the air moved the curtain. But over the next several days, the same pattern repeated. Whenever I entered the room at night, the curtain moved. At first I tried to ignore the thought forming in my mind. Surely I was imagining things. However, curiosity slowly turned into unease. One evening, I decided to test the pattern. Instead of turning on the living room light immediately, I stood quietly in the hallway. The room remained dark. Nothing happened. Then I stepped inside and turned on the light. Within seconds, the curtain across the street shifted again. That moment sent a cold feeling down my spine. Because suddenly it seemed less like coincidence and more like observation. Over the following week, I noticed additional details. Mark's living room light often remained off while the curtain still moved. Sometimes I saw a shadow standing behind the window. Other times the curtain opened just enough to reveal part of the room inside. It began to feel as if someone was deliberately watching the house. At first I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. After all, looking through a window is not illegal. People glance outside all the time. But the timing continued to feel too precise. The movement always happened when I entered the room. Never before. Never afterward. Eventually, I mentioned the situation to my friend Alex. Alex laughed slightly when I explained the pattern. Maybe he is just curious about the new neighbor, he suggested. But even Alex admitted something. If it keeps happening like that, it does sound strange. A few nights later, something happened that made the situation far more unsettling. I returned home later than usual. It was nearly midnight. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed a faint glow from the window across the street. Mark's house looked completely dark except for one small light near the window. When I entered my living room and switched on the light, the curtain moved again. But this time it did not close quickly. Instead, it opened slightly wider, just enough for me to see a face watching from inside. The moment our eyes met, the curtain closed abruptly. I stood frozen in the middle of the room. For the first time, the situation no longer felt like imagination. Someone had clearly been watching, and that someone was Mark. The following day, I decided to confront the situation calmly. Instead of letting my imagination run wild, I walked across the street during the afternoon. Mark opened the door after a few moments. He looked surprised to see me. "Daniel," he said, "what brings you here?" For a moment, I considered avoiding the topic entirely. But curiosity and unease pushed me forward. "I wanted to ask you something," I said. Mark waited quietly. "Have you been watching my house at night?" The question hung in the air for several seconds. Mark's expression changed slightly. Not angry, not defensive, just embarrassed. Finally, he sighed and invited me inside. What he explained next was something I never expected. Mark told me that his younger sister, Rachel, had recently moved into his house temporarily. Rachel had experienced a difficult situation involving a break-in at her previous apartment. Because of that experience, she had become extremely anxious about safety. Whenever she stayed alone at night, she constantly checked the windows and watched the street outside. Mark explained that Rachel often stood near the window looking across the street because the lights in my house reassured her that someone else was awake nearby. "She feels safer when she sees activity outside," he said. "She never intended to make you uncomfortable." Suddenly, the entire situation looked completely different. What I interpreted as suspicious behavior was actually someone dealing with fear and anxiety. After hearing the explanation, my reaction shifted from concern to understanding. Rachel eventually came into the room and apologized personally. She explained that she had been trying to overcome the fear left behind by the break-in. Watching the street had become a habit that helped her feel less alone at night. We spoke for several minutes. By the end of the conversation, the tension that had been building in my mind disappeared completely. Over the following weeks, we developed a friendly routine. Sometimes Mark and Rachel waved when they saw me arrive home. Occasionally, we even shared short conversations outside. The strange situation that once felt unsettling eventually became just another story about misunderstanding. Sometimes our minds create explanations that feel frightening simply because we do not know the full story. And sometimes the truth turns out to be far less sinister than we imagine. Situations like this show how easily misunderstandings can grow when we only see part of a story. If you notice something strange happening near your home, how would you react? Would you investigate immediately? Or would you assume the worst first? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy suspenseful real-life stories about strange discoveries, unexpected explanations, and moments that change how we see the world around us, subscribe to the channel. Because the next story might be even more surprising.